Good evening. Good evening. I'm Larry Souter, and welcome to Stories of Amazing Grace. We're coming to you from Bixter Chapel at the Madison Church of Christ in Madison, Tennessee. Thank you for joining us online and being a part of our live audience. Our theme scripture always comes from Romans 8:38 through 39. And I am convinced that nothing can ever separate us from God's love, neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither our fears for today nor our worries about tomorrow. Not even the powers of hell can separate us from God's love. Our guest is Teva Chaffin. She's a survivor of domestic violence. And in this country, 1 in 3 people are physically abused by an intimate partner. In 1997, Teva became the 1 in 3. In this country, 1 in 4 women suffer severe physical abuse from domestic violence. In 1998, Teva became the 1 in 4. In this country, 4,000 women die each year due to domestic violence. And thankfully, that's one statistic that Teva does not lay claim to. Teva says she wants to share her story of an answered prayer tonight in hopes of encouraging other survivors. Part of Teva's healing process is her talent for art, and you'll meet Teva Chaffin right after this. And Teva, come on up. Glad to have you.
Thank you.
Have a seat.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. I saw your presentation, was it a month ago?
It was
2
in
months?
January.
January. Mm-hmm. And you had an excellent PowerPoint. We have some of those slides with us, and we're going to start with the first one, the beginning, October 4th, 1997. Why is that date? Is that the wedding date?
That was the wedding date. We had only dated a couple of months before he proposed. It was a very quick dating, which is also characteristic of an abuser.
Things were good then.
Mm-hmm.
When did the abuse begin?
It began 2 months after I said I do, and it was because the way that I set the Christmas tree up is what caused it. So
That set him off.
that's what set him off.
Any background associated with that, why that would...
No. Later in life, I found out that that's just another part of the characteristics. It's a cycle of abuse, and that's when it started. So, not exactly sure. I guess he just didn't like the way I had it set up. So.
The theme of this interview, and you proposed that in previous talks, is an answered prayer.
Yes.
And you pray to God to get me out. And part of your PowerPoint lists some of these. Just go through some of these and explain.
A lot of this, if you look at it, and if you've ever had anybody experience domestic violence, you see that these are very common from one person to another person because they're traits of them. So the abuse usually does start after a marriage because then you become their property. So then they do start to abuse. So ours, he did abuse me the first time 2 months after the wedding, and it was always forced sex after. And the reason why that is because it's like you're forgiving them, although you're not saying it's okay, and you're not saying yes. And then they get into a pattern, which he did. It was about every 3 to 4 weeks that he would go through the cycle of abuse, which is like a tension period. And then the abuse happens, and then there's a honeymoon cycle where he's apologizing and saying it'll never happen again.
How did you receive that when he said, I apologize?
I believed him.
Okay.
each time I believed him. But it was still a little more than I could bear, and that's why I always prayed for God to get me out. So each time became more intense, and then there's a reason for that. Each time it becomes more intense because you stayed. So they have more power over you. Each time they're talking and they're using words and verbal abuse to gain control of you. So again, he always apologized, promised to never happen again. His mom would actually make excuses for him. So she would even say things, well, you must have upset him. You know, it was really crazy. But
Had he been married before?
He had been. And he had actually abused her, but she was one that fought back. I never would fight back. I mean, I didn't know. I've never had violence in me. So he threatened me and anyone that I told. That's why I never told my dad. I never told my sisters. I never told my friends. I never told anybody.
But you wanted to, I assume? You wanted to share or not?
I wanted to, but it wasn't worth the cost that I thought it would be, and that was their life and their safety. And we actually know of someone that her and her mother, they both lost their life because she told her mother. And I mean, it happens. The abuser will threaten you, and they'll actually come, and anybody that you tell, they'll try to remove them from your life.
We have a picture of you, and we saw this earlier. Let's see it again. This is before the abuse. This is the wedding, I guess, or during that time. Before we show the next shot, I guess I need to warn some people.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So the next shot is going to be after the worst abuse, and it's just prepare yourself for the visual. So, okay.
Right, let's see that.
Yeah. So.
This is in the hospital.
That was at Vanderbilt. And when I look at this picture, and I see it often because I'm writing speeches and things like that and doing PowerPoints, but I noticed the left eye. I've always said eyes are like the passageways to the soul because you can read people through their eyes. And that one is so lost, so just numb when I look at the person and look in that eye. Because the first thing my family did was they put a mirror in front of me and said, this is what he did.
What was your thoughts when you looked at yourself here?
I was still thankful. I was still thankful I got out of it. It could have been a lot worse. Could have been a whole lot worse.
Was this particular abuse over a period of days, hours, or all at once? Or
No, it would usually happen, and it would be like a couple hours blow up. You've
Really?
got that tension period that I talked about, the cycle of abuse. So that's where, like, I would make sure he had his sweet tea fixed when he come in the door and make sure I prepared his meals and things like that. So that's where you're walking on eggshells because you don't know what's going to actually set him off.
I think you listed some things here. I felt alone.
Oh, I had a lot of emotions, a whole lot. I felt fear. I felt fear on an everyday cycle when I was in that relationship.
Could you do anything about that fear? You couldn't really tell anybody. You didn't think you could.
I was in college and I didn't feel like I could even talk to my advisors or anything or teachers because I believed him. I mean, he threatened constantly if I told anybody he would kill me. And I did believe it. And he said he would kill the person I told. So that's that verbal abuse, and that they get control over your head and over your person. I think if I'd have been more of a person to be a little bit more where I would fight back, then maybe a person couldn't have that much control. But that's just not my makeup.
And how can you fight back other than just telling someone what happened?
You can't. He outweighed me by 65 pounds. No. And he stood a foot taller than me. There was no way to fight back.
What was the reaction to those? You mentioned college professors that didn't really know anything, right, when you were in school.
Yeah,
and
I
then
tried.
Did they see this picture of you?
Some did. I went back to Austin P, or tried to go back to Austin P after. I went through a long time of rehabilitation, speech therapy, physical therapy, and things like that. So when I did finally go back, I had to have someone go with me into each class to take notes because I have attention problems, and a lot of things just go right over my head, which that's okay. I'm okay that way.
But so there were mental things as
Yes.
well as the physical.
Yes. So a lot of them, they had no idea. I mean, the instructors, of course, that was 20-something years ago, so it's hard to remember how a lot of them responded. But they were all very eager to help, and the campus police made sure that I was always safe when I was back on campus, too. But I did find out I couldn't finish the classes, so I had to drop back out. And then I finished my degree in 2007. So it took 10 years to get a degree. But that's okay.
But you got it.
I got it. Yeah.
So how you felt? I felt alone. I felt fear. I felt confused. I felt betrayed.
Yes. And I felt widowed, actually, after the fact. I felt like because he was all of a sudden removed from my life. So you have to go through this process, even though it's an unhealthy relationship, you have to go through the process of eliminating someone from your life like that, emotionally.
How soon did you remarry?
It was several years, actually, and then when he started asking me out, and I'd known my husband now, I'd known him since I was a teenager. So, but it took a while to say yes
Yeah,
to that.
I'm sure. You felt doomed. You felt trapped.
Very trapped.
Felt scared. You felt emotional pain. Of course, physical pain. You felt tortured. You felt grief. You felt like a failure.
Yes, I felt like I had failed. I left him at one point, and I went to a sister's house, and she didn't know what was going on. And so she recommended trying to work on my marriage. And so I went back, and then it intensified, because once a woman leaves and they go back to the abuser, then the abuse always escalates, and it gets harder. But my sister had no idea what was going on, because I know she wouldn't have told me that I needed to go back had she known. So, and after the worst injury in '98, the picture you just showed, even my dad had issues because I didn't go to him. And a father's place is to protect his daughters or all of his children. And I took that opportunity away from him because I wouldn't come to him and tell him. And I knew he would have been able to have helped me, but I just didn't want anything to happen to my daddy.
So he was not necessarily disappointed with you, but just so upset that he couldn't do anything.
Yes.
Didn't know anything about it.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Years ago, I spoke with Captain Rita Baker. I don't know if you heard that name before. She's with the Metro Police Domestic Violence Division. And she commented on why women do not leave a domestic violence situation. See if you agree with this and can comment on that. Let's roll that.
There's lots of reasons why a victim stays in a relationship. Fear is a big one. A victim knows that leaving is the most dangerous time in a relationship. For up to 2 years after a victim leaves, that victim is at risk of death or serious bodily injury, because it's at the point of leaving that batterer loses the ultimate power and control.
So it's fear primarily?
Absolutely, 100%.
Not just during the abuse, but after?
Even after. And I still watch where I go and who I go around, and there's places in Tennessee I won't go.
What's his situation now, the abuser?
I don't know if he's married or what, but I know the location he's in.
Does he know where you are?
I hope he don't. I hope he doesn't.
Do you have reoccurring fear that he could show up sometime?
Absolutely.
Really?
Yep. In fact, when I go to the mailbox, I have my husband come and watch.
I see.
Yeah. There'll always be that. I'll always.
And that's
do
been
that.
how long since that abuse, you said?
97, 98
Okay.
was the worst. So
Wow.
July of '98.
So you're still cautious.
Still very cautious.
How long was he was incarcerated, I assume?
He was, so he spent a total of like 9 years in prison, but it wasn't all on my case. So they were trying to get attempted murder on mine, and it got reduced to aggravated assault. So he ended up serving like 7 years on my sentence. Well, when he got out, he obviously had a girlfriend that he pulled the same shotgun on. And then he went back to jail, and so then they removed his early dismissal from mine. So he actually had served more, I guess, on
This
that.
is the story you told. Tell me about the shotgun.
The shotgun was,
He violated her with the shotgun.
yes, and he had done the same with me. It was a shotgun that was passed down in his family.
And he pulled the trigger.
Yes. When I was semi-conscious after the head injury, and the police came and EMS came, then he had the shotgun, and he even said he had used it, and he had ripped off all of my clothes and things like that. So there's a difference when a woman says, no, I don't care, even if you're married to him. No is no. But that's such a normal pattern and behavior with domestic violence abusers.
But with another person, he actually pulled the trigger?
No, he didn't pull the trigger on her, but he did pull the same gun on her, and that's why he went back to prison. Now, there is a girl that we know, her sister, who was violated with a shotgun, and that one did pull the trigger. So she has a lot of medical conditions that she has to live with now.
Wow.
So I was lucky that he didn't pull the trigger.
Well, in part of your PowerPoint, you have some baby steps. You're taking one day at a time, and there are 4 areas. So
after it all happened, I felt like I had to gain control of my mind, what little mind I had left. And I say little mind because I went back to a 3rd grade elementary level. And that was after 2 years of college. So I had to get control. And I figured the only way to do it was these different categories. And one, spiritually, that was the most important. I had to heal spiritually. And the way that I found that and the way that I found peace spiritually was praying for him.
Really?
Which was hard.
I bet.
Because I was angry. And I prayed constantly. I kept a journal where my journal entries most of the time was to God. And sometimes I would even write it to my ex-husband like a letter, never to be seen by him. But I had to do that in order to get my emotions out because it was unfinished. I was not able to say anything that I wanted to say about the pain and things like that.
So what would you say to God in your prayer?
Most of the time I begged him to help me, to help me to get from one day to the next day. And I knew that I had to take baby steps to get there. So I may one day turn that journal into a book. Maybe. There's a lot of, I can't say immaturity, but because of the mindset that my mind was in at the time that I wrote it and the level that it was on, it was really a lot of emotion in it. So it would have to be toned down somehow in a book and reminisce, or something like that. So the spiritual healing was the most important. And like I said, I did find that I gained more peace in my life by praying for him, just for God to guide him. I wanted God to make him know what he had done and for him to realize it and to admit it, which he never did. And then my mental healing, of course, the speech therapy I went through for a year. And then I was on the 3rd grade elementary cognitive level. I had to practice to regain my memory span, which I'm not sure I've got it back yet. I walk in the grocery store repeating bread, eggs, milk, bread, eggs, milk. And then I get in the store and it's like, ooh, butterfly. It's like, forget what I went in there for. I went to group therapy. I actually came to the group therapy at this location.
Really?
And that helped me so much. And that was 20-something years ago. Because in domestic violence, when you start hearing other people talk about their experience of it, you start hearing things that sound familiar to your own story. And so you realize that there is cycles and there are characteristics and traits of an abuser. But I also had to go through anger management. And I think the most helpful thing was when I went to my first meeting with the counselor at Centerstone in Clarksville. She told me I had every right to be angry. Nobody had ever told me that.
That was a relief, I guess.
That was a relief. And so I think that helped to start my mental healing by hearing that. The physical healing, I went through a physical therapy for a year. I had broken bones. I had broken nose, teeth. I postured. So a lot of times with the head injury, your muscles will all spasm in and stuff. So, and I still have to make myself sit up because I want to withdraw in. And then personal challenges, I had to learn how to drive again. So my dad had to teach me how to drive all over again.
Really?
I learned that over in Old Hickory. So going to the grocery store. I wanted to get my independence back. It was important for me to get out and prove not only to my family but to myself that I could be okay and take care of myself. And I finally slowly went back to college the right way, and I graduated from TSU in 2007 instead of Austin Peay. My family too, just helping them to understand why I didn't tell them what was going on.
Your father was upset. Was your mother, what'd she say?
My mother had passed, so my dad remarried when she passed in 1989.
I see.
And my stepmom was wonderful to me. She took care of me. She helped bathe me when I came home from Vanderbilt. She was wonderful. And then, of course, I had to go through the court, and not just for prosecution of the case, but for divorce. And even though my dad had a divorce attorney at his house the day I came home from the hospital, it still took like 6 months because he was in jail, so you had to give him so many days before he was served and this and that. So when I think, we hear of victims of domestic violence, I have to say I felt more of a victim of the court system and the
Really?
justice system than I did anything else. And the reason being is when we finally went to court, his attorney was attacking my character. And if you think about it, what does a woman ever do that would warrant to be abused and beat and raped? I mean, that makes no sense. But attorneys do that. They're trying to build a case and all. So he served time over it, but I figured each day he has to live with what he did, and whether he would ever admit that he did all of that, then he has to live with it. And that's what I pray for God, just to maybe bring him peace. I believe he can get forgiveness from God.
You had to put your experience into perspective.
Yeah, so I try to always talk about, look what I survived and not what happened to me. And the reason being is, so when I was bald and I would go in the grocery store with my family member or friend or something, then somebody would say, "Oh, did you have a car accident?" And I was like, "No, my husband tried to kill me." And I did not ever say that. That to me was an opportunity to first bring up domestic violence. The more that we can talk about it, the more the stigma is removed from it, so that people will feel more freely to talk about it and to get help. So I think it's important for knowledge is to always talk about it and be willing to talk about it. We may not always be brave enough to talk about it, but God pulls us through.
What did you learn from going through domestic violence? Several things.
Oh, first one, God answers prayers, for sure. And maybe be a little bit more specific in what you pray for.
Did you think at the time, where is God?
I felt lonely from, at
why
one
doesn't
point,
this stop?
yes. But I never blamed God for the situation I was in because it was my own action that I said I do and married him. So it was my action that got me in the middle of it. So, but I did beg for God to get me out. And each time I prayed, I was begging. The power of prayer is so powerful. And who knows, maybe somebody was praying for me that was across the country too that didn't even know me, or maybe somebody that had experienced domestic violence, abuse. I did learn that I never caused the abuse because they try to make you think that you pushed their buttons or it was because you replied this way or something like that. So I learned that I did not cause it. And I also learned that love should never hurt. I mean, it should never hurt. And then I learned baby steps, one day at a time. And that's whether you go through any kind of trauma, then everybody can use the one step at a time, the baby steps, or one day at a time. And that I did learn that abuse is a learned behavior. He was 4th or 5th generation abuser. So he learned it from his father. His father learned it from, and the way I know that is his father called my dad and asked if he could come up and see us after I got out of the hospital. And his dad sat out there and wept like a baby, saying that he felt responsible because he learned it from him. And he told us about the history of it in his family. So we can always change and stop that behavior, by ending the cycle of abuse, but it is learned. So let's say my ex learned it from his dad, who learned it from his dad, who learned it from his dad. So they learned that that's the appropriate, acceptable way to treat a spouse. Well, and then his sister, she was more likely to go out and pick an abuser because she saw her mom live with the abusive father. So it's a cycle. And the only way to change it is to stop the cycle. I also learned that God was and is always with me. And he's still always with me every day. And I'm thankful for that.
And how do you feel now?
I feel happy. I feel very blessed, very thankful. I feel like I should take the opportunities that I have to help others and to maybe bring it to more light. We're moving more and more, I guess, law-wise, that it's going to help and protect the abused person. So I think we've come a long ways, but we still have a lot longer ways to go to help educate and then help reform even the system.
And one of the ways in your healing process that you cope with this is through your art. Tell me about that.
I do believe art is healing. As I said earlier, I suffer from multiple art disorders because there's not a medium that I won't try and work with, whether it be sterling silver or wax carving, which you can cast later to make multiple pieces, sculpture, leather, wood. I've even done wood carving. Of course, not with the hand whittler. It was more with a burr and a flex shaft, so more power tools. That's soldering. So soldering silver. And I teach a lot of classes, too, because I feel comfortable sharing the knowledge that I've gained over the years in how to do it. And, that's with an acetylene torch. And it's a wonderful way that a ring comes together.
Yeah. And we have some shots of your jewelry.
Yes. So all of my jewelry pieces, and I'm kind of phasing out. I'll come back probably with jewelry in a couple of years, but these designs are all going to go into retirement. You learn that you don't turn your hobbies into a business because it takes the fun away.
I see. This is a plaque you made, I guess. And this is important to you. Learn from yesterday.
I didn't make it, but I have it in my office, and I see it every day because we've got to learn from yesterday, and we have to spend time and live for today, but we always have hope for tomorrow. And one thing that my husband, Bobby, has taught me is that every day is a new day. And it feels really good to hear somebody say, I'm so proud of you, because he says that almost on a daily basis. So I'm very blessed in that aspect.
Do abusers show any potential warning signs?
Yes, they do. That's a very good question, Larry. And In fact, a lot of people that are maybe dating, some teenagers even, should read up on it and learn these. So let's say a girl and a guy's out on a date, and the guy grabs the girl's phone to look at it because a message came in or a phone call came in. So they're wanting to know who it is that came, that's calling them. That's a little bit of a flag there. I think, too, that I have to mention they can appear like the grandest person ever walked in public. They can be like the biggest gentleman ever was, and just attentive, appreciative, and loving and kind in public. So, but when you start to see a change in personality in private than what you did in public, that's a warning sign. So, and if, I know guys and girls are really different now because they might wrestle and stuff like that, but I think there's still, you have to be careful at what you accept. There has to be boundaries, and boundaries are healthy.
But we're so in love with the other person at the time, we think we can change the other person?
Yes.
And we're blinded?
Yes, blinded. And now, can an abuser change? They say it's possible. Do I believe it? I'm not sure. I know with God, all things are possible, but I'm not sure.
You haven't seen any cases where people...
I haven't seen any cases like that.
Wow.
No.
Are there men who are victims of domestic violence?
There are. A man's pride will prevent him from telling anybody, even his own doctor or anybody like that, to get help from. So it's less likely to be reported. But yes, I actually know of a man that has been abused by a girlfriend.
Wow.
So, and you hear, the more and more that I go about and speak, like I do, I did speak for an EMS conference, and I was speaking to first responders, fire, paramedics, and police were there. But there's a lot of warning signs that they can look for, like if a woman or a man tries to talk for the woman, or if the woman, if it is a case of an abused man, is the woman answering all the questions when they come in the door, asking about medical and things like that. So if you sit back and watch, you can see things that are maybe not just as the way that they should be.
You recommend any resources for people who are going through abuse?
Find a group therapy. Find group therapy. I wouldn't tell a girl to go and tell her daddy, just for fear that I'm afraid that the person would go and kill, because they're going to always strike out to whoever you confide in. But if they go for professional help, and if they can get into a group therapy, then that group would actually know, or safe house, Morning Star Sanctuary, Agape. There's lots of organizations that's in Tennessee and Middle Tennessee that can help. So if it's a professional, say like if you know a police officer or you know a doctor or a nurse friend or something, then that's the ones you would tell.
Does abuse occur in a marriage early on or 20 years later, or is there any...
I've actually heard of a case. I did group facilitating one time in Clarksville for the Legal Aid Society, and there was a case where a woman had just been started getting abused after 15 years of marriage.
Really?
I think in a lot of times like that, maybe it's something medical that would cause it. I think there's a lot of different aspects and things that can go into that. But a true, or I don't want to use the word true, but in an abuser, you usually see traits and characters and characteristics of them.
Any questions?
Mm-hmm.
I'm a friend of Teva's, and I've been in this sort of situation myself, and my daughter's in that situation right now. In fact, I'm going to court tomorrow for a trial. Domestic violence is increasing, unfortunately, even with all the resources we have. And I think more needs to be done about it. I appreciate you being here. I'm sorry what you've been through, but you've made it through it, and you give a lot of people a lot of hope.
Well, and I want you also to know to always be careful. By her telling you, and always be careful.
Do authorities normally believe the abuser when they stand up?
Well, I think now they probably do, but like my first time that I was abused, that was in December because of the tree, then 2 police officers came to our apartment, and one took me into the bedroom or the bathroom, which was in direct eye contact with the other officer and him in the living room. And then behind my head was a hole in our drywall, and in that room, in the bathroom. And so the police officer asked me if he had hit me or anything like that. Well, when I looked into the living room, I knew I couldn't say anything.
Wow.
I knew I couldn't say anything. And so that was my first broken bone, not so much as a bone as it is or whatever, but it was the tailbone, because he had picked me up and slammed me onto the couch. But that should have been a warning sign there with the police officers, but 20-something years ago, they probably didn't have the knowledge of what to look for domestic violence. Hopefully now they have more knowledge. If they don't, I'll talk to them. I'll teach anybody. I mean, there's so many different things that they can look for that it ought to be obvious. So now I think they have to be held for so many hours. I think 12 hours or 24 hours if there is abuse, or somebody files makes a call of it being a domestic violence. But like with the EMS, when I did the speaking for them to the first responders and the fire, the call doesn't always come in as a domestic violence call. It may come in that a lady fell down the steps. Mm-hmm. Well, you take a lot of falls, but it's not from your own doing that you fall.
Bass?
You said that his mother told you that it was something you were doing, and then I heard you say that she was abused.
Yes.
Did you know she was abused at that time when she was telling you that?
No, I didn't even know it was in his family. Oh, I probably didn't even know what domestic violence was at that time. I mean, I grew up in a little country town, Ashland City, or Henrietta, where Pathead Summit was from. So you never really heard about domestic violence. You might hear of some man came in intoxicated and his wife pushed him down or something. You didn't hear of true domestic violence. I never remembered it.
Well, the other thing I wanted to ask, I had one of my best friends in college had left also with head injuries from her husband. And I said, why? Because this wasn't the first time. And she said, I just kept thinking, and this was a valedictorian of her class, one of the 2 students in the state that went to Washington, D.C. for the summer internship. And she said, I kept trying to think there must be something I can do to help him and change him. And so she was taking on his responsibility. Is that what you do if you're violated?
That's normal. That's normal behavior, but it's not right. But yes, that is normally what you do, and that's why you walk on eggshells. You try to make things as easy and make excuses for them and all and things like that. But then when it comes down to it, the reality is they're an abuser and unhealthy.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Did you suspect that your husband was seeing other women or anything during this time? Okay.
No.
And the second thing is, was verbal abuse first, or did it matter? Was it verbal and physical at the same time, or physical abuse first, or?
In December, the verbal and physical came together the first time, because we were usually around my family, maybe out cutting wood or something like that around other people. So I never really saw it, and it was always behind closed doors or, where nobody else was with us.
Well, interesting you mentioned the training. I held a license for nursing in New York State, and that was one of the requirements even years ago for the continuing education. We had to have training in spouse abuse or physical abuse, so it's needed, like you said.
Yeah, and I see too, when I go to my primary care and my specialist and all, they always have the sign on the back of the door. asking, are you abused? Do you feel unsafe or anything like that? So I'm glad that that's out there because back then it wasn't. I mean, I went to the doctor about my tailbone and I was never asked. I just said I fell. So that's why I say a lot of things come in as falling, but it's not actual falling.
Teva, I know when you were dating and married, you were so in love. But later, when you look back, could you remember things that should have been maybe a red flag that...
Absolutely. I definitely, I think, and a lot of people do this, but I was always trying to make love there. You know, that I was in love, I had to make it that it was love, and it wasn't. You know, you hear growing up that you're a female, you grow up, you get married, you have children, then you have grandchildren, and that's just the cycle that it's supposed to be. And so I was trying to be the wife. I was trying to, you know, be what I was always taught that you do. You grow up and be a wife, and so, yeah, it doesn't always work the way you plan it.
Right.
Hi, I appreciate you sharing with us.
Thank you.
As I sit and listen to you, I think of 2 Corinthians chapter 1, where it says, God comforts us in all of our afflictions, so that we may comfort others. And you fit right in there. But the question that I had for you, back then, when you prayed and asked God to help, did you become angry at him because he didn't intervene sooner? Or do you look back on it now and see it as a sense of you deepening your faith?
I think looking back, I felt alone, like I was alone even from God, but I did know that God was there, but I grew up knowing God was there. So I'm thankful for that. But I never did get angry at God. I have been angry at God before when I lost my parents, but I didn't get angry at that. So I felt like he was my friend. I felt like God was my only friend, actually. He knew everything inside my heart. So I just never really was angry at him.
Well, thank you for sharing your story. Anything else you want to share while we're wrapping up here?
Oh, you really put me on the
Yeah,
spot.
yeah.
It's like brain hurts now. No, I mean, I do want to start. There's a few things I want to start. One is I want to start a program, Art for Healing. I think that would be great. I can teach anything that I make, I can teach.
Okay.
I think whenever you start working on an art piece, then it's easy to get caught up in it and you just escape. And so you're in your own little world. My family always said, but by being an artist, you know, sometimes we're weird people. But I was always told I lived in my own little fairy tale world. Yeah, I like it there, you know. So in art, you can create that. You can create that peace that you want and that serenity. So.
All righty.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for sharing. Well, I'm sure others will benefit from your story as well. To recap some of the things that you learned, God answers prayer. Number 2, I did not cause the abuse.
Right.
Number 3, love should never hurt. And God was and always is always with me.
Yes.
So, do you have a story of amazing grace? If you do, share it with someone this week, and we'll see you next time on Stories of Amazing Grace. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for being with us.